What up? I'm Josh Paulson, and welcome to Your Story Now. Today we are going to look at breaking down a story. So you might remember that we defined a story as something that happens, and we said that a story could basically be explained in one sentence then, because it's pretty simple. So like, Bob falls in love with Susie was an example we gave. Now, something interesting about this definition is that every time that we create a story, we are actually creating a bunch of mini stories implicitly. Why? Well, every time that something happens, we know that it somehow began, ended, and moved from beginning to end. Every story, thus, intrinsically has a beginning, middle, and end. So the question is, how did Bob start to fall in love with Susie? Well, this could happen in myriad ways, but we're going to say that Bob met Susie. This could be they met at a coffee shop, at an airport, perhaps it was a blind date. There's a bunch of ways they could have met, but we're just going to say for now, Bob met Susie. Now, how did that end? Well, it could be that Susie had something that reminded Bob of his mom, or it could be that Bob loved a conversation that they had. So let's say that Bob and Susie had a deep conversation. And in essence, what we have here is the piece that ended up bringing all of this together to result in this. So we're breaking this down further and getting more detailed. How did they go from meeting to having a deep conversation? Well, maybe they ate dinner. So let's say Bob and Susie ate dinner, and specifically together. So Bob falls in love with Susie. Bob met Susie, Bob and Susie ate dinner together, and Bob and Susie had a deep conversation. What this has just given us is some direction for our story, and I kind of went through this process without really breaking it down visually in the last video about story. So Bob falls in love with Susie. Well, Bob met Susie. Bob and Susie ate dinner together. Bob and Susie had a deep conversation. Great, but it's not really deep enough, and it's especially not deep enough if you have a very complicated, long story. So how did Bob meet Susie? Well, it could be Bob walked into a shop. Bob saw Susie. Perhaps she was looking at a great book. And Bob struck up conversation. That could be how it works. And sorry for how this is kind of clumping together. In general, this is not how I recommend that you write these outlines, but this is a good visual. So then Bob and Susie ate dinner together. So this could be Bob asked Susie out on a date. And then it would be Bob and Susie met at a restaurant. And then it would be basically they ate together. Or you could be more specific and even say that Bob and Susie got their food. So we're breaking these ideas down to get closer to the details. And this gives us more of an outline. So then Bob and Susie had a deep conversation. It could be that Susie brought up her depression. And it could be that Bob was sympathetic. Which, I guess depending on the direction we go, this could be a really codependent, unhealthy start of a relationship, or this could be something really good. So let's pretend that this is good and say Susie brought up her depression, Bob was sympathetic, or they both shared their vulnerabilities. So basically they end up feeling safe around each other. So in general, I'd actually recommend using a list in order to write this out, because it gets really messy if you're trying to use a table like this. Good visual, but if you are writing this out for your own story, I'd recommend doing a list like this. So here we have a much more generally readable and work-withable outline. You can even take these all further. We could go, Bob saw a cool store, decided to check it out. And then we can keep breaking things down from there, and we can go as deep as we need to here. But for now, we're just going to stop at this third level here. So what this allows us to do is from one sentence, just really from following that definition of a story being something that happened, come up with a story outline. If Bob falls in love with Susie, he needs a way to have that happen. Somehow that starts, somehow that ends, somehow that moves from beginning to end, and we can break those pieces down as well, because how something starts, Bob met Susie, that is something that happens. Bob walked into a shop, something that happens. So we get a story that we can break down into stories. We get storyception. And this is a really great way to break down your story and to develop your story now. Now, something is really interesting. This might look familiar. Perhaps you've heard that you should be able to explain your story in one sentence in order to have a clear vision. The idea behind that is kind of like an elevator pitch, where if you can really explain your story in a concise manner, you probably have a clear vision for it, and you also really know what it's all about. And then we also have a 3-act structure. Now, some people are probably not going to be happy with me saying that because there's a lot of different approaches to the 3-act structure. Some of them this may not match as well with, but this can line up with the 3-act structure. You have generally your rising action, how things started, your instigation, your catalyst, and then you have your overall rising action and things moving up to the climax, where in this case they have a deep conversation, and that could be a big tension, or it could be something more relaxed. We'll talk about conflict in a future video. And then down here we have a story outline. So this breakdown, simply from a definition of a story being something that happens, gave us the 1 sentence, the 3-act structure, and a story outline, which are general practices in the entertainment industry. This is why that definition is so powerful. And we're going to follow it even further to discuss characters in our next video.